Imagine being so tormented by something inside you that you start bleeding from your eyes. This isn't a scene from a horror movie. This is the real story of Maurice Theriault, a farmer whose childhood was so full of trauma, it might have opened a door to something truly evil. His case would become one of Ed and Lorraine Warren's most terrifying investigations, leading to an exorcism so intense, they decided to film it. But to understand how a simple farmer became the center of such a horrifying paranormal storm, we have to go back to a miserable childhood on a remote farm, where the seeds of this terror were planted. Maurice Theriault, who went by Frenchie, grew up on a farm, but his life was anything but peaceful. His childhood was a nightmare of relentless, brutal abuse from his father, a man described as a maniac who would beat Maurice for spilling milk. The farm work was grueling and the abuse was constant. Desperate for any escape, young Maurice would work the fields, cursing his father and repeating a single phrase to the sky, "I'd rather work for the devil than work for you." He was begging for help from any force, good or evil, that might be listening, and it seems something answered. Suddenly Maurice reportedly had the strength of two men, able to do farm work with an unnatural ease, but this new strength just made his father work him harder, forcing him to drop out of school with only a third-grade education. The horror of his childhood was sealed by an incident in the barn that Maurice would never fully talk about, only hinting that it was a depraved act he was forced to witness and participate in. This trauma festered inside him. He no longer felt right in church or even looking at a cross. At 21 he finally escaped the farm, but the darkness came with him. For years he drifted, trying to build a life, but the cycle of violence wasn't over. Years later, in an event some sources place in 1982, his father shot and killed his mother before turning the gun on himself, a tragic end that mirrored the brutality of their lives. After years of drifting, Maurice eventually settled down in Warren, Massachusetts, with his new wife Nancy and her children. For a little while, things seemed normal. Neighbors knew him as a kind, gentle man. But behind closed doors, a different story was playing out. Maurice started to change. He'd slip into unexplained trances, his personality flipping from gentle to violent in a flash. He suffered from memory lapses, losing huge chunks of time. Then, things started getting weird. And then, they got scary. Small fires would spontaneously break out around the farm, objects moved on their own, and a foul smell would sometimes fill a room. One evening, Maurice fell into a trance while driving and nearly caused a fatal accident, an event he later couldn't remember. Nancy would later say he confessed that he felt like a demonic force was living inside him. Perhaps the most disturbing claim was the appearance of a doppelganger. Nancy reported seeing Maurice walk out the front door, only to have her daughter scream moments later, finding him sitting in the bedroom having never left. In another instance, he walked out of the living room and a second later, walked back in with a steaming cup of coffee. He couldn't possibly have made that fast. He insisted he'd been in the barn all day, but his boots were free of snow. The family was living in constant fear and confusion. Desperate, Nancy reached out to her local priest, who, after witnessing some of the bizarre events himself, contacted the most famous paranormal investigators in the world, Ed and Lorraine Warren. When the Warrens arrived at the Theriault farm on February 18, 1985, they found Maurice in a trance at his kitchen table. As Nancy recounted the terrifying events, something happened that, for the Warrens, confirmed their worst fears. Maurice's eyes reportedly began to bleed. He told them this had happened before when he recalled deeply traumatic memories. Lorraine, a self-professed clairvoyant, claimed she could see a powerful demonic entity attached to Maurice. Ed documented the reported physical evidence, the inhuman strength, the sudden appearance of blasphemous words on his skin, and the family's accounts of him being in two places at once. They concluded that Maurice's childhood trauma and his desperate pleas had invited something in. For the first time, someone used the word possessed. The Warrens knew this case required an exorcism. The story of Maurice Theriault is one of the most chilling cases in the Warrens' files, forming the basis for the book Satan's Harvest. It's a case that blurs the line between psychological trauma and supernatural horror. If you find these deep dives into strange and mysterious cases interesting, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It helps us continue to bring you these stories from the shadows. Now back to the farm in Warren, Massachusetts, where a spiritual battle was about to begin. On May 2, 1985, the Warrens, along with Bishop Robert McKenna, a priest experienced in exorcisms, prepared to confront the entity tormenting Maurice. Ed Warren made the controversial decision to document the event on video, capturing what many believers say is undeniable proof of possession. What the footage and witnesses reportedly show is horrifying. As Bishop McKenna recited the prayers, Maurice's body reacted violently. His face seemed to change shape as he spoke in guttural voices, and what sounded like unknown languages. The video is said to show boils bubbling up on his skin before cracking open. A deep gash suddenly appeared on his forehead, bleeding freely, and witnesses claimed crosses materialized on his body. At one point his eyes, which witnesses said were bleeding, rolled back into his head, and he collapsed. When he awoke moments later, the marks were gone, and he called out for his wife Nancy in his own voice. After the grueling ritual, it seemed Maurice Theriault was free. For a time, he returned to being the gentleman his neighbors knew. But the peace wasn't going to last. Although the exorcism brought temporary relief, the darkness wasn't gone. The Warrens themselves warned that such a powerful entity might just go dormant rather than be completely expelled. Maurice's behavior grew violent and erratic again. The abuse toward his family returned even worse than before. Fearing for her life and the lives of her children, Nancy eventually fled. The story of Maurice Theriault came to a devastating and tragic end in November 1992. In a horrifying echo of his father's actions, Maurice broke into Nancy's home with a shotgun, shot and severely wounded her, and then dragged her back inside the house. Nancy, who survived the attack but lost an arm, described him as fighting with himself in the final moments. Then he turned the gun on himself and ended his life. The cycle of violence that began in his childhood had come full circle. The case of the haunted farmer remains one of the most disturbing and complex in paranormal history. It inspired the book Satan's Harvest and is referenced in the Conjuring universe. But the central question has never been answered. Was Maurice Theriault truly possessed by a demon, a victim of supernatural forces? Believers point to the filmed exorcism, the bleeding eyes, the symbols appearing on his skin, and the reports of superhuman strength as proof. Or was this a tragic case of profound mental illness born from a childhood of unspeakable abuse? This theory is bolstered by his own sister, who claimed Maurice was an actor with a long-time fascination with the occult. She insisted he was faking the possession, and that his speaking in tongues was just a mix of French and Pig Latin. Could a man so broken by his past manifest such terrifying physical phenomena? Or did his suffering crack open a door for something else to step through? We may never know for sure. The story of Maurice Theriault is a chilling reminder that sometimes the deepest darkness isn't in a haunted house, but in the unhealed wounds of the human soul.